So we are on. Okay. We're talking today with John Barry of St. Clair, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, John, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at a very young age, October 28, 1930.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in Pittsburgh, or did you move around?
Predominantly grew up in Pittsburgh, 2 or 3 neighborhoods that I can recall. I went to grade school and high school in Pittsburgh until the high school didn't want me anymore.
All right. Now, what was your family doing for a living while you were growing up?
My mother never worked. In those days, that generation did. But my dad, he was in the bar business several times, but that never panned out too much. I think everybody and his brother was in the bar business. He had several partners that they tried it again and again. But then the war came along, and he ended up working in a steel mill because everybody had to go to, do something that was going to help the war effort.
Okay.
So he, after that, he had planned on going to work for the post office as a letter carrier. Eventually he did after the war, and so he carried mail for the rest of his life.
Okay. Now, what do you remember about the war years? I mean, in what ways did having a war go on affect your life?
The thing that I remember mostly about the war years is when they were forming the air raid wardens, young people like me, we were volunteered to act as messengers and several other small things. I don't recall all the titles, but we had a little armband to wear, and the air raid wardens wore steel helmets. We didn't get that far. We just had a little armband, and they would pass messages on, and primarily if we were to be going down the street to deliver a message, if you saw somebody's lights showing, they were supposed to have the lights out, blackout. Of course, they used to have blackout practice is what it was. I can remember seeing so many of the young people in the neighborhood. They were coming home on leave and they were in uniform. I remember several that they had received word that they were killed in action.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after the war, I decided I wanted to go live someplace else in Canada. So I lived in Canada for upwards of 5 years. I worked in construction, predominantly around the Toronto area, but we traveled as far north as the Sudbury district. We did some work down at the Fort Erie where they crossed the bridge into Buffalo. But we rotated around. It was a pretty big company at the time, Heather and Little, very, very good company. They had their eye on me because one of the higher ups told me that they had plans for me, and but I would have to go to school. Since I had never finished high school, they said they would support me to finish high school, and I would be working like part-time. But about this time, I had been home, and while I was there, I turned 18, and like a good U.S. citizen, I registered for the draft. So around 1950, I guess it was, maybe 49, I received a draft notice to report to someplace in Pittsburgh for a physical. Well, I wrote them back and says, I'm living in Canada, I've got a car, I've got a job here. It's going to take me a little bit of time to clear this up. So they sent a letter back. I wish I would have kept these. They sent a letter back saying, well, we don't need you at this time, but make arrangements to come back to the States. Several weeks later, I got another letter saying that I was not going to be drafted at the immediate future.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, I carried on with this job, and I was working with the management people. They were doing me good. I was doing them a good job. Well, then all of a sudden, I got another draft notice. Well, this time I was in better shape, so I made a couple of phone calls, and we decided that I had to be there on a certain date. So I went back to Pittsburgh and reported in, and they said, "Oh, while you're here, we don't need you again." I said, "Well, should I go back to Canada and take up where I left off there? Because I had a pretty good future. I could have stayed in Canada by renouncing my American citizenship, but I wasn't going to do that. I'm a Yankee. I'm a U.S.er. So I went to work there, and I worked in construction for a while there, and finally they notified me to go for a physical. I took the physical, and I had so many days, I think it was like 5 days after the physical, that I had to report for induction, or I could enlist in any other branch of service. There was a waiting list for the Air Force. There was a partial waiting list for the Marines. The Navy, I could walk a lot further than I could swim. So talked to the Army recruiter. The program was that if you enlisted for 2 years, you had quite a bit of reserve obligation at the end of your 2 years. And you also were assigned where they wanted to put you rather than where you wanted to go. If I took a 3-year enlistment, I got my choice of branch, if I was qualified, and I would have no reserve obligation, so I figured I would get my discharge and probably go back to Canada. That was why I took the 3 years.
Okay. Now, what year is this now when this is happening?
This is the beginning of 1952.
Okay. So by this time, the Korean War has been going on for a year and a half or so.
Yep, about a year and a half.
And if the Army is going to simply assign people where they're needed, being in the infantry in Korea is pretty likely.
Well, what the thing was, this is a little different than for what most people went through. I went through a basic training unit in Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and where we had infantry, artillery, armor, and partially engineers rolled into one. We got a little bit of everything. Naturally, you're a rifleman to begin with. So that was essentially what it was. But I did get assigned to the field artillery, and I did learn more
I
about
need to
it.
back up a little bit here. The first thing about winding up in the infantry, that would have been for the guys who went in for 2 years, probably. That's what they would
Most of them went, yeah.
And so you're trying to control your destiny a little bit.
Right.
Now, did you pick a particular branch within the
I
Army?
picked the field artillery.
Okay, you wanted artillery.
Yeah.
All right. And so they send you now down to Arkansas for the basic training. Describe a little bit that first chunk of
Well,
training.
essentially, the first 6 or 8 weeks was rifle training. I would say rifleman training, where you're getting your basic infantry schools training, I guess you could say. And after that, we start branching out into a little bit more field artillery. Then we got a little bit of armor, a little bit of engineers. Then we'd back up and rotate into some of this again, only modified, where some of the people that had come in at the same time were in one of the other units. They were concentrating strictly on infantry type training, but there was some that were strictly on fire direction center training, which was more expansive in the field artillery. Why I didn't end up in that, I have no idea.
Okay.
But as it was probably because I didn't have a high school diploma.
Okay. Now, how much, while you're going through this training, how much emphasis was there on discipline?
Very much, a lot of discipline. We were, I was really impressed. We had a first sergeant who was more like an administrator. We had the company commander was a lieutenant who had got a battlefield commission in WW2. Then there was a young lieutenant who was his assistant. We had a field first sergeant. He was the second ranking sergeant, and he's the one that took us out for our training. Took us out to the field. Made sure we marched in proper order and all that stuff to where we were going for the training. Then we had platoon sergeants, and every one of them was either a World War II or a Korean War veteran. So I paid attention because I figured they learned something. They came back, I'm going to go and come back. So, everybody knew we were going to go to Korea,
Right.
and whatever the situation would be.
Okay.
I enjoyed basic training. I did.
Okay. Were you in good physical shape going
Oh
in?
yes, I was in best shape. Not quite as but I went in. I weighed about 155, maybe 155 pounds. I wore a size 31 pants, 31 waist, 31 inseam. I don't recall it must have been about a 14 and a half or 15 shirt. When I came back from Korea, I weighed 165 and I was hard as a rock. I was in such good shape, but part of that was hustling ammo in the field artillery. But I enjoyed the military,
Okay.
and that's one of the reasons I stayed in.
All right. Okay. So you didn't have a lot of trouble just adjusting to military life?
No.
Okay. So following orders was okay, and
No, you learned it. You were given your training manuals, your recruits recruit training. They advised you to read it. Some did, some didn't. I read it.
yeah. Okay. You'd have been good in college after all. You did the reading.
Well, I got college later on.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. All right. And then, in terms of your artillery training, what were you actually physically doing?
Just about physically, we would be on the artillery pieces, learning how to tow them, learning how to set them up, learning how to fire them, load them and fire them. Also, this was one of the reasons that I picked the field artillery. I was curious to know how they could fire around some 10 or 12 miles away and hit what they were aiming at. I found out how that was done with the fire direction. You didn't aim through the tube or through a sight at your target. You aimed at aiming posts, and you set it up, and it was all done on paper. You drew your little sketches and your angles and azimuths, and you figured it out, and doggone, you hit that son of a gun. That was good.
Okay. Now, what kinds of artillery pieces were you using?
For basic training, we were using 105s. The unit that I went to Korea and joined was 155 Howitzer, which was half again as big.
Right. Okay. Now, about how long did you spend in Arkansas?
Oh, upwards of 4 months.
Okay. And while you're there on the base in training, did you get to go off the base at all?
Oh, after about 3 or 4 weeks, we got I guess you could call it a partial pass. We would stand inspection on Saturday morning, and if you passed, if you had so many demerits, no pass. But if you had just a few, or you were within whatever it was, whatever the criteria was at the time, you got a pass from, say, noon until 11 o'clock at night, 10 or 11. Because in order to get back, the buses quit running, so you had to get the bus. So we went to, it was Fort Smith, Arkansas. Not a bad town. There was nothing in the way of say, a northern type dining room. You could find little restaurants and get a hamburger kind of thing. Wasn't much of a choice in the way of eating. They had beer bars. I was not a beer drinker. I like the odd beer now and then, but that's about it. And all kinds of Army-Navy stores. They'd sell you 20, 30, 40 ribbons. You can pin them on your shirt and look like a soldier,
All right. But it was at least a little bit of a break from just being on
Oh,
the
yeah,
base.
yeah. I shouldn't say problem. In a way, it was a problem. You went into town and you got off the bus, and there might have been 20 or 30 people from various churches and church organizations trying to get you to come to their church. For that afternoon, they would give you a dinner, but you would have to be preached at. And I think, forget it. That was not my thing.
All right. Okay. So, and then was there a movie theater in town or anything like that? Or do
No,
you-
not that I can recall.
Okay.
I don't think there was a movie theater. Shooting gallery, I can recall that because we've been out there shooting on the rifle range, and we're going to go to a shooting gallery. I don't know.
All right. Now
It was some interesting tourist things there because that's where the largest, I guess, the largest, I got to think of what his name was, but the largest gallows were right there in Fort Smith. And the hanging judge, it was quite a historical place because on the other side of the river, what the name is, I don't know, was Oklahoma. We were everything was off limits. We could only go to the town, and but it was historical, and I'm a history nut, so.
Okay. Now, in that area of Arkansas, did you kind of notice segregation, or was it largely a white
Not
population?
so much. Segregation was still in effect in the Army because there were black troops that in the same unit. We started off. They put them in a separate barracks, and we were in. I think it was 3 other barracks. But about maybe a month into the training, they integrated, and so where the black troops were became another platoon, and then they went by alphabetic order because there was 2 guys right behind me. One was Barrett, which was close to being a Barry, and the other was, what the heck was the other one? Oh well, just a couple of days ago.
Right. Okay. Now, were there any problems when they integrated the units?
No trouble.
Okay.
No trouble. I had some pretty good, I'll tell you a little later on when we get to Korea.
Okay.
But these guys were just like me and everybody else. They were drafted or enlisted. They were trying to learn what to do, and a couple of them complained because they had rotted teeth. And they had to get all their teeth pulled and get false teeth. But yeah, they took the training, and we worked together on many projects. Some could handle they used to give you a map and put a half a dozen of you out in the middle of somewhere and say, find your way home kind of thing. And so you would work together and work out the map reading problem. I forgot about that. Just remembered the map reading.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess were the black guys, did they have less education as far as you can tell, or were
No,
they very...
some of them had, some of them were school teachers.
Okay.
We had school teachers, and we had most of them at least pretty close to high school education.
All right.
There was only a handful that came from the very southern states like Alabama and Mississippi that did not have too much in the way of education. And also you wondered, and even I overheard some of the officers talking, why did they draft this guy? He was 38 years old, 7 kids, and he was a sharecropper. So, but they drafted him into the Army. And that's his local draft board that
Right.
did that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the draft.
And there was
system.
2 or 3 like that I can recall. They were good guys. Yeah.
Okay. So once you complete the training, do you get orders at this point to go to
Oh,
Korea?
yeah, about a couple of weeks before you're finished. We were FECOM is what Far East Command. And so we had orders like mine. I can't recall all the details. Somewhere in the pile, under the pile of junk, where it says, you're going to FECOM, Far East Command. And that's it. That's all it said. And we, 13 or 14 days on a troop ship, holding about 2,500 troops.
Before you went on the ship, did you get a leave to go home?
Oh,
or-
yeah.
Okay.
There was 10 days, 12 days, something, a couple of weeks.
Okay. And then were you expected just to get yourself from home to the port of debarkation?
Yep, yeah. You had they either gave you a travel voucher where you went to the railroad station or whatever and turned it in for a railroad ticket. Then there was also the you could do it yourself, pay, and if you didn't want to travel by train or bus, you could set it up your own way. And then you would recoup. They would pay you back when you got to the other end. But if they had given you, say, $50 to get from Arkansas to Seattle, Washington, and it cost you 75 going another way, they only gave you the $50.
Okay. Okay, so did you take the train?
I traveled by train, and I bumped into a guy near Cheyenne, Wyoming. And he was an officer. He had just finished OCS from Fort Benning, and my orders read travel and report in uniform. So here I am, buck private, and this guy was in uniform, but he was a second lieutenant. But anyhow, we more or less traveled. He says, we're going to take the bus. You take the bus from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Seattle, Washington? He said, yeah, there's a lot of girls that travel. And so anyhow, we bought bus tickets. And sure enough, there was two groups of girls some of them were from, had just finished high school, we'll say, but some of them were from a college or junior college, and 8 or 10 of them from each group decided to travel around, let's say, make sort of a circle. You could buy one ticket that would do that for you at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever, I can't remember that lieutenant's name, but we bought tickets, and we had a lot of fun, because we're traveling all the time, and none of us have got any money to speak of. I mean, you got a few bucks in your pocket. I remember we stopped at a rest stop, and where was it? Anyhow, they still had one-armed bandits in the rest stop. It wasn't Nevada, it was one of the other western states, it might have been Utah. And I won $10 on the one-armed bandit. I said, gee, $10 is good. Felt good about that.
All right. So did you make it to Seattle on time?
Oh, we got to Seattle on time, yeah. And like when we were traveling with all these, like 20 gals, and we picked up another GI, 2 guys. But they weren't going to Seattle. They were going somewhere in between. But they rode with us for, like, say, a day. And we had sing-alongs going. And we had a lot of fun. And I would never have thought of riding a bus that far.
All right. Okay. Once you get to Seattle, you go to
we
Fort Lewis?
reported into what they called Pier 91.
Okay. So you're going right to the harbor.
And we were in tar paper shacks. And it was damp and cold and foggy in the morning. And we had to process. There was things to do. I don't recall what all it was, but it was paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
But we did get passes. But you were restricted to certain areas of Seattle, which I thought at the time was a very nice town. They had some some good restaurants, and there was some sightseeing. They had a pretty good aquarium, which I finally got to see an octopus. And but Seattle was good. It was on 3 hills, and if you went to the bottom hill, that's where all the dumps were. The second and third, that's where the nicer places were. And now that's been a long time.
Yeah. Okay. So how long did you spend in Seattle?
Less than a week.
Okay.
Because they woke us up, bag and baggage, and they put the bags on the truck, and we got on a bus, and we went to the dock and got on. They checked you off. You had a number on your. No, we didn't have the helmets. That came later. Mm-hmm. But you were given a number, and they wrote it in chalk on you. You had fatigues on. And you went up the gangplank, and they directed you around. And boy, did I have a bunk. There's all these canvas, there's pipes with all these canvas things laced in. That's what your sleeping thing was. Well, boy, oh boy, right in the point of the boat, below the water line, because it sweated, cold sweat on the inside of that steel. I could go like this, come up with water, and 2 or 3 bunks higher, and I would have been above the water line. But it was funny. But then you're crowded. They were about, like, some guys were like 6 inches from the floor, or the deck, I guess as you could say. And there was 1, 2, I was 3rd or 4th, but I was in the point of the boat that couldn't get any closer to the front.
Mm-hmm. Now, what that would mean then that if you're in high seas, you're going up and down a lot?
We ain't there yet. And anyhow, we had to put our duffel bags in a central area. And if you needed something from your duffel bag, you had to go dig it out and get it and put it back. Next time you needed something, it was buried again. So there was 2 or 3 guys up above me, and we were hardly out of Puget Sound when we started picking up the ocean rollers, the waves. By the time we hit the Pacific Ocean, 1/3 of the troops were sick, seasick. And we got maybe 6 or 8 hours. I wanted to see the Golden Gate, and we were going to be out in the ocean, but you could look back and see the Golden Gate framed against the sunrise.
The Golden Gate is in San
Not
Francisco,
the Golden
right?
Gate. They had another.
But there was a bridge there or something?
Something, yeah.
Yeah, something to see.
Not the Golden Gate. No, that was another thing. Yeah. But there was something you had to. No, wait a minute. I had got ahead of myself because the Golden Gate that came later.
Okay.
But now this time, yeah, I'm curious. Hey, I'm traveling on a big boat. No, where do they put the oars? You know, that kind of thing. But they run us through some drills in case there was an emergency. You know, where your lifeboat position was, what job you had. Some guys had to let the rope down, and some guys just stood there and looked smart, which I did. It was interesting. A buddy of mine, he went on another ship. They left a day or 2 later, I believe. And they had a collision with a whale. And didn't do the whale any good. But it damaged their ship, and they had to turn around and go back to Seattle. It bent one of the props or something.
Now, what kind of ship were you on? Was this just a purpose-built troop transport?
They were troop. They were. It was the U.S.S Marine Lynx,
Okay.
and they were victory ships.
Okay.
They were made as troop ships,
Mm-hmm.
and all they had was they could hold 2,500 troops, and they had a little ship's hospital. They had. Now you stood up to eat. There was no such thing as sitting down.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started hitting the bigger waves, your tray was going up and down this table that you were standing at to eat. And sometimes you got part of his food in your tray, and sometimes you got part of his food in your tray, and sometimes they got some of yours in their tray. This is when we start hitting the rough stuff. Now, I know what it's called now, the Great Circle Route, but at that time I had no idea what was going on. But we sort of went up and down the Aleutians.
Mm-hmm.
And about 3 or 4 days out of Japan, we run into the fringe of a typhoon, which is like a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, boy, we had some rough weather. Now, we had all over the troop area garbage cans, galvanized garbage cans. The idea was is if you felt like you had to upchuck, you picked up the lid, upchucked, put the lid back on. Of course, nobody said anything about the garbage can moving up and down on these rough waves, and didn't stay in the garbage can very long. that didn't, let's see, we were gone, we were out to sea maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe 6 days, doesn't matter. And most of the guys had recovered. There was me and 5 other guys that didn't get sick.
Did you have any trick, or did you just get
I
lucky?
just didn't know. Heck, I used to eat, I was eating Jell-O, and I was eating cereal in the morning, I was eating eggs, and the old, you want a raw, how about a raw liver sandwich, something like that, you know? That was an old joke. But no, I mean, I just, normal. So we ended up eventually trying to stay away from the other guys, because it's not really funny to watch a guy eat 2 or 3 mouthfuls, and then go running, spit it up in the garbage can, then come back and start eating again. So a lot of them did that.
Okay. Now, did you stop anywhere en route?
We
or-
know we went all the way to Yokohama.
Okay.
Yokohama, and they unloaded us in Yokohama. And we went to Camp Drake, which was a military post on the outskirts of Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
We turned in quite a bit of our clothing, you know, stuff that we normally wouldn't have. Now, to my way of thinking, why did they dump that in the States?
Mm-hmm.
And you kept your wool clothing and shirts and underwear and boots and so forth. And you were issued a rifle. Now, the field artillery at that time, the basic weapon was an M1 carbine, but they had so many M1 rifles from WW2 that everybody got an M1. When you got to Korea, you were supposed to turn it in, but they didn't do that. They changed their mind again. So we were issued an M1 rifle and taken out to the rifle range and spent about 2 or 3 hours adjusting and working on the rifles so that they would fire again. And so we fired at the target, and you didn't have to qualify. You'd already qualified back in basic training. Just had to make sure you had the rifle zeroed in. And if you needed it, you'd shoot it.
Now, were these rifles things that had been in storage for a long time?
Yes.
So you had to
In
clean
storage,
them?
yeah, they were in Japan or somewhere else. But they had these big crates, and you walked by, and they picked up a rifle, handed it to you, and you had to recite the number, and that was what was assigned to you. And it went in your paperwork somewhere.
Okay. Now, when you're in, how long did you spend in Japan?
Maybe a week.
Okay.
We did not get any passes in Japan. We were, like I say, we were questioning what our assignments are going to be. Where do we go? All I know is I'm going to Korea. And they wouldn't tell you anything, the personnel people that you came in contact with. But later on, I got my orders, and it read, which was very surprising to me, 75th Field Artillery Battalion, COL. And I asked the clerk, what 75th Field Artillery 75th Field Artillery Battalion, I understand, but what's the COL? Colored. And I said, I don't understand this. I know the Army segregated. He says, oh, they're integrating. The Great Integration. Mm-hmm. And he says, they haven't changed that. They're still designated that. Okay. And we got back onto another ship, not the same ship, but it was essentially the same thing. We went to Incheon. We were unloaded from that ship onto landing barges. And you had your rifle and your duffel bag, and you went down onto this big landing barge, and they hauled you into Incheon, and you unloaded. And we went into 2.5-ton trucks. I don't know how many trucks there were because they were lined up like a son of a gun. And we traveled 4 or 5 hours on the back of those trucks to a place called, it's right there. No, it's not. It left.
Now, was this up?
It was a rebel depot, replacement depot.
All right.
And it almost came back, but forget it. It doesn't. So we were processed there. And we were told that we were going, like in my case, I was going to 9th Corps Artillery for reassignment. And that's what a whole bunch of us. And we went, no, we didn't go by train, that was later. Anyhow, Chuntron, that was the name of the town.
Okay.
Chuntron. And we went by truck, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, and to service battery for the 75th Field Artillery. And we spent the night there. Now, all of us were privates. There was one corporal and a master sergeant. He was enlisted reserve. He turned out to be a pretty good soldier. I liked him, knew him later on. Anyhow, the next morning, we went out, we were broke down, and there was 10 or 11 of us, I forget, but I keep saying 11. But we were sent to A Battery. And so we were assigned A Battery, 75th Field Artillery Battalion, COL. And almost everybody in the unit was colored.
Mm-hmm.
And we got there and we're looking around, we see all these howitzers lined up, they're under camouflage netting, all kinds of sandbags, and some of the sites were made out of logs, reinforced with sandbags. But you're seeing this from the back of the truck. And we had, on our way before we got to the battalion, we saw infantry guys pack on their back going up and down the roads. So we don't know where we're going. We're along for the ride. Well, we got there, and somebody says, we used to call him Charlie, Victor Charlie. VC, no, not VC,
Yeah, that's the next war.
That's the next one. Joe Chink. We called him Joe Chink. And that was the Chinese and the North Koreans were called Joe Chink. And Joe Chink decided to welcome us, and they dropped a half a dozen mortar rounds, which did not come very close to us, scattered around essentially around the area. Nobody got hurt and nothing was damaged. But this big black guy grabbed a hold of me, put me in the ditch, and laid on top of me. I said, "What the heck's happening?" I didn't say heck, but what's happening? He said, you might be my replacement. I'm saving you.
What happened to you?
Joe Brown was his name, great guy. But anyhow, we got out of the ditch, everything quieted down, and we were, stood at formation. We were given a briefing by the battery commander. I can't recall his name right now, because he left us about 2 or 3 weeks. He got promoted. Anyhow, he gave us a briefing on what we were going to be doing, and if we had a particular penchant, some guys wanted to be truck drivers. If they could, they'd make truck drivers out of them, because they needed ammo trucks, haul ammo all the time. And or if you wanted to work on a gun, you could get on a gun, or be a wireman. There's so many different jobs in a field artillery battery. In the meantime, like I said, there's about 11 white guys and maybe 220, 230 colored guys. I mean, you're going around meeting all these guys. You're shaking hands, and we're just doing good. Here's where we eat. This is, don't forget your mess kit and all this sort of stuff. They start breaking in on the little things. That turned out to be one of the best outfits. 20 years in the Army, that was one of the best outfits I was ever in. Most of these guys, well, I shouldn't say most of them, a lot of them were from the Philadelphia area. Some of them were from Georgia, and some of them were out west someplace. Maybe California, but I can't recall all of them. But about every week after that, we would get anywhere from say 6 to 8 white replacements, and 6 to 8 of the black guys would go home.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how it worked. We ended up more or less, I'm going to say, 75, 80% white, and the rest were colored. Now we had some Puerto Ricans, which was strange. They had their own infantry regiment.
Mm-hmm.
where most of them went to that, but for some reason, we had a half a dozen Puerto Ricans. Bothered me not, we just soldiered along. We had some good chow. The mess sergeant was one of the best mess sergeants that I ever ran into in the Army. He'd been a mess sergeant for about 15 or 20 years. Back in the 30s, he was an old soldier. And he had his cooks. He worked them son of a guns because he says these troops are going to eat. They're going to eat the best you can give it to them. And boy, don't ever give them a half-cooked egg or something. Boy, he'd stomp all over them. He was, I can't remember his name, but he was the son of a gun. But boy, was he good. Food was great. Of course, you didn't have your choice of too much. A lot of powdered food, a lot of powdered eggs. We ate a lot of C rations, and we had K rations, which were in a little box. They were somebody called them breakfast rations. And there was a little can of, say, a ham and egg mixture, probably powdered eggs. I thought they were good. But this is where you learn to like hot sauce.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you got a chance, you could steal a bottle from someplace, hot sauce. And when you got into some of those C rations and K rations, and even some of the food in the mess hall, hot sauce, good stuff.
Great.
I still like hot sauce.
Okay. Now, what kind of assignment did you have with that unit?
The first assignment, I told the field first. Well, the chief of firing battery was a master sergeant, Sergeant Washington. I'll never forget him. He'd been in the Army about 30 years at that time. He was the chief of firing battery. Was the senior non-com of the firing part of the camp or of the battery. We refer to it as a battery rather than a company in the infantry.
Right.
But anyhow, Sergeant Washington, he talked to each one of us individually. I told him I wanted to learn as much as I could about the field artillery as a whole. I wanted to spend some time on the guns. I would like to spend some time Fire Direction Center. I would like to spend some time on the forward observer party. I wanted to be a wireman. And he says, that could hurt your promotion chances. I said, yeah, but I want to learn everything there is. Whether I'm going to stay in the Army or not, I'm not sure, but I want to learn, because all that was in basic training was a flash by. And so Sergeant Washington, he sent me somewhere for a couple of weeks, or a month. And so I was working on the Howitzers. Enjoyed it, and it was messy because we'd pick up and move in the middle of the night. And these things, we used to have to put two guys on the tube, which is the barrel, so we could counterweight it to get it hooked up to the M5 track is what towed it. We had to learn we had to pick up the ammo. Now, each projectile weighed 95 pounds, give or take a little. And we had to load that onto the back of the prime mover, also on the back of our ammo trucks. And you pick up 95-pound ammo, you got something there. Mm-hmm. That's why when I left there, I was in pretty good shape.
Now, was this artillery, were these rounds, would you have sort of the warhead or the explosive part, and then would you add powder charges to it?
You had some that came with a fuse.
Okay.
But they were safe. But you also had some what they were called cavatized. You had this projectile about that tall, and it might have been about a 6 or 8 inch hollow down the center. And it was called shell cavatized, but you had a VT, Victor, a variable time, that's not quite right. But anyhow, it was like an electronic fuse that you would put, and the explosive part was down into the projectile. So when it exploded the whole projectile, rather than from the front end if it had landed straight down. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so we had those, and we also had a variable time where you could set them so it would go off before it got close to the ground, maybe 20 feet above the ground, 50 feet above the ground. So you would get an airburst, and that airburst could cause a lot of casualties.
Yeah. Now, did you have to add the powder charges to the
Oh,
shells?
yes, they were
Okay.
separate. There was a separate ammo, separate can. I believe the minimum charge was 4 or 5. Charge 4, charge 5. But inside this powder can, there was 4 or 5 bags. No, there was more than that. Maybe 7. No, charge 7 was max. There were 7 bags. One of them had said 1 and 2, and the next one was 3, 4 and 5. They were prepackaged.
Mm.
And so you put the projectile into the tube, and then you follow it by the charge, whatever the charge was supposed to be. The higher the charge, the further the distance, the further the range. So we did that, and we'd move, maybe move 10 miles, maybe move 5 miles, maybe get to where we were going, turn around, and come back to the same place. If it was raining and muddy, and at night on the roads, with our tracks pulling our guns, you can't see a darn thing. We had no night vision. We had a little tiny headlight about that big with a slit that if you close your eyes, you could see better. And it was, oh boy. And there'd be somebody else coming the other way. Get those tanks out of the way. There's no tanks. It's ammo. I mean, it's artillery.
Yeah, and we're talking unpaved
Oh, dirt roads.
country
that's all.
roads out in the
Yeah,
middle of
oh
nowhere.
yeah. There was.
Yeah.
I don't think there was 2 miles of paved road in Korea at the time.
Right.
That was something I forgot. When we got to Korea and we were getting ready to unload the next morning, you could smell the country, the human waste.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the rice paddies, and it stunk. But once you got there, a couple of days, you didn't even notice it.
Mm-hmm.
But you had these paddy wagons, and oh, I'll never forget it. We broke down one time. Truck broke down, and here comes 3 paddy wagons. And we were down below the firing line. And here comes 3 of those paddy wagons, and all the guys on the truck. Oh, that stuff got you.
No, just, I mean, I think in civilized society, a paddy wagon might be slang for a police car or something that would take away prisoners. But were these horse carts
This was
or ox carts? Or?
yeah, they were ox carts. But they would pick up the human waste in the villages. If they didn't use it in their own rice paddies, he took it down the road, let somebody else put it in his rice paddy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
All right.
We had later on, one of the guys driving an ammo truck, they started to get shelled. There were 3 or 4 trucks in this convoy. They started to get shelled, and so they pulled the trucks off to the side and got out of the trucks because they couldn't do anything, couldn't get away from them. And this one joker, he jumped into a hole in the back of an old farmhouse. That's where they kept their, that's where they kept their waste. Nobody wanted to get close to them for a while.
Now, how much military activity was there? Were you firing every day?
Well, we
or-
fired every day. It would vary. Everybody had like a base position, and you had prepared a position behind you and a position in front of you. Now, the position in front of you could be anywhere from all 6 guns in each battery of 6 guns, or maybe 1 or 2 guns, depending on what the situation is. But in most cases, we had everything. We would register. We had one piece that was designated as the register, the main one.
Mm-hmm.
We would fire that maybe 2 or 3 rounds to make sure that according to the wet weather, the meteorological conditions, everything would be fine. But sometimes everything got damp and rain and heavy or snow and cold and whatever. It would affect what your positioning, what your target area was going to be. So the idea was is if you had a good target and another target came up which had not been fired at before, you could go from that one to the new target by saying we're going to go right 200 yards and we're going to go north 200 yards. Now we're in meters. It's a different setup now. We were metric before. before we left there. What we had an advantage with our guns because even though the 155 howitzer was more an area weapon, it also had a bit of precision capabilities. And we used to take them and put them behind a little rise where you could fire over this rise at some of the target areas. The Chinese, the North Koreans, they used to dig tunnels into these hills and mountains. They would mount, they had a 122 millimeter mortar that they would put on little flat cars. They would run these flat cars out, fire 10 or 12 rounds and pull them back into the cave. And they also had 152, I think is what it was.
That was the Russian gun. Yeah.
And they would be the same way. They would run the guns out, fire a few rounds, and then back in. So they sent us up on many occasions, 1 or 2 guns, to close those caves. And with precision fire, I mean, we did some precision. We got it down to where you'd give me a bump on the crank, and it moved the tube hardly perceptible. Then you put that round right in that cave. Of course, the next day, Chinese had dug it out again, and they had another gun in it.
Mm-hmm.
But we did this quite often. But it was that thing when we were firing, and the gun chief, what the heck was he called? Anyhow, the non-com in charge of the gun, he says, I got it as tight as I can, but we can't put it in. And one of the guys says, well, give it a bump. Bang, just bang against it. You take the slack up, down, you put one in this tunnel. That was fun. Then we had another, I don't know, mixed company, this may not be so good. We had a part of the time I was going up to the observation forward observer's post, where we had an officer and about 3 or 4 guys. At one time we had, our guns were in front of the forward observer because of these valleys and so forth, the hills and valleys. But to go up there, when we went, we had a truck, and we took all our supplies with us. And I'm going to say, if I can come up with a distance, I'd have to stop and think. It would take 30 minutes. Well, we had to get up the top of this hill, and we had used it several times. So what you did was you put a backpack on in 2 cases of sea rations, and you had a 5-gallon can that was fuel oil, 5-gallon can that was water. Now here's 3 or 4 of us. We're doing this. And so we're going, we call it chogi. That was a Korean term for marching. So we're going to chogi up the hill, zigzag and all this sort of stuff. And the last 50 feet, you had to do it with a rope. So we'd get up there, unload all of our stuff. 1 or 2 of the guys would climb up and drop the ropes down, we'd pull it the rest of the way. So we had this little bunker that we had, and where we had our binoculars and our BC scope. And we had some pretty good spots where they were. But on the other side of the valley, where the bad guys were, we had, we think he was a captain. He used to come, maybe this is not the right way to put it, but he would come out first thing in the morning out of his bunker over there. He knew where we were, and we knew where he was. We didn't want to knock him off because they're liable to send somebody smarter to take over the position. But he would come out and do his business. Okay, I'm going to say that he dropped his pants and shook his rear end at us. That's the way. It was not quite that, but he'd do that, towards us. So this where we had these firing positions, we started playing games with a map and a needle, and got it so we had a shell was going to land just about where we wanted. So we knew where he was going and what he was going to do in the morning. And so, but like I say, we didn't want to kill him, scared out of him. And so we had it all pegged in so that when he came out and played his game, we played our game. We talked, pushed the button, fire. one round, maybe 35, 40 feet from him. You ever see a guy run with his pants down? The expression is, close your ears, girls. Scared the shit out of them,
Right.
But we accomplished quite a bit. I was really, proud. And like I say, this was one of the best outfits I was ever in.
Did the Chinese ever launch any offensives on your section
Oh
of
yes,
the line?
They overran a unit that was in front of us, the Triple Nickel, the Fifth Regimental Combat Team. This was still when that integration was going, because most of them were colored. That's what it was from WW2, the Fifth.
Well, that had been a white unit when it got to Korea.
It was black, but it was converting like every place else. It was integrating. They had an infantry, a reinforced infantry battalion. Then they had a 105 artillery battalion, and they worked together all the time. They would move as a whole unit and come and so forth. So, but the infantry got pretty much overrun one time, and they were I lost a couple of guys. They were into the artillery. I lost a couple of the guys that had gone through basic training with. They were in the field artillery part. But as it turned out, by this time, we had reformed. We were firing artillery. We were as heavy as we could get it, to protect our guys. By this time, they got an reinforced infantry, a couple infantry companies, and they finally got them wiped out. And like I say, I lost a couple of good guys there, and so they had to reform and move out to get really fixed up because they got hit bad. Also, they used to hit you in the middle of the night, one round, and drop it where they figured the middle of the battery was. And sometimes 2 rounds, sometimes 10 rounds, harassing fire. So they did that, and there's nothing like getting up in the morning, and here's an artillery projectile with the nose in the ground and the rest of the projectile there. It didn't go off, it was a dud. And you looked at that. Now that thing, where it landed, it wouldn't hurt anybody, unless somebody happened to be walking by. But it was in our area, our area of responsibility, our battery area. And it may have caused some damage, but several others had exploded in that vicinity, but this one didn't go off. Yeah, but it was interesting. Like I say, we take off in the middle of the night with 1 or 2 guns and travel 10 miles, 15 miles. We'd have to lay the gun. And like I say, we were given pre-assigned targets, this particular hill. Now, I don't know whether they were covered in the news quite a bit. In those days, there was a big monster of a hill. We called it Papasan. And, but it was Hill 1062 on the maps. But then there was quite a few other hills that everybody had heard of. Triangle Hill, did you remember hearing that? Jane Russell Hill, Marilyn Monroe Hill.
Pork Chop Hill is the most
Pork Chop
famous.
Hill in the same area, yeah. But anyhow, we would work on those because somebody would decide that they wanted the infantry to take them again. And then 2 months later, they move out, and then Charlie moved back in. And so,
Did your base camp ever move, or did you?
yes, we moved. Everybody had about 5. But we had to work on both of them. So some days we would just go and work on the camp or the base. And then some days we'd go in and stay there 2 months and move somewhere else. We would travel maybe as much as 30 miles. Sometimes they would move us for a short period of time. And when I say a short period, maybe a month or 6 weeks. They would move us to support one of the Korean infantry units. They didn't, well, this is the thing that happened. one of their 105 artillery outfits had been overrun. They had reformed it and retrained it. They had no fire direction center, no people trained for FTC. So they sent me, me and one or two PFCs, and they sent a couple of truck drivers. They sent us to this, what the heck was their designation? 18th Field? I don't know. Anyhow, me and another PFC, we became their fire direction center. Of course, you had to learn the numbers, because the commands are given individually, like 1, 2, 3. And so when you go Hana, Tool, Set, Chi, Go, Roko, you never forget those numbers because you had to learn them.
Did you have an interpreter or somebody to help you?
We had a sergeant, a Korean sergeant. He was pretty good. But I tell you, the battery commander, he used to steal our sea rations. He didn't show me much. But later on, the second trip, I swear I saw that joker. He was a colonel then. Korean.
Okay. Now this tape is about up, so we're going to pause right here
Okay.
and rewind and reload. All right. Now at this stage in the story, we've kind of talked a lot about your stay in Korea, 52, 53. Then there's a number of different dimensions of this that we kind of want to add. We looked at a lot of sort of the military side of things. Now, you were there at the point when the armistice was signed.
They were working on it, yeah.
I mean, the official one, I think, official end date actually was in July.
June, I think. June.
Yeah, June. It started in June and ended in July, if I remember right. But basically, and then you're there until early September, I guess, or
No, I was gone because I had more points than I needed.
okay.
But they moved us to Busan, not the unit,
Okay.
individuals, which were way down at the very tip. So they moved us to Busan. And we were there a while.
Okay.
And we went to Japan, Sasebo. And we were in Sasebo a 3 weeks anyhow. And then we got on a ship to come back. On the way home, my stomach wasn't used to all that good, clean food and slippery silverware because I got on the troop transport, and next thing you know, I woke up. I was in the ship's hospital with amoebic dysentery, and I was the only. There's about 3, 4, maybe 12, 15 bunks, double deckers. And they had doctors on board, they were rotating, and they had medics and so forth. But it took, a week anyhow. They were giving me belladonna, which was supposed to kill all the microbes that caused all that dysentery. But you talk about being sore and weak but I spent, like I say, at least a week in that ship's hospital. And while I was in there, they brought a guy in and did an appendectomy on him. I guess it ruptured or whatever, but there was 2 or 3 doctors. They were doing it right next to me.
All right. Now let's kind of go back a little bit now to the time spent in Korea. How much of the country did you actually get to see while you were there?
Not a heck of a lot of it, really. If you take, I think the area that I was in is now north of the demilitarized zone. I can remember we were off towards the east of Kumwa. Kumwa is nothing more than a bunch of piles of rubble. The only thing standing was the safe door on the bank. But we were to the east of Kumwa. I think there was a place called the Punch Bowl in there. And they had there's something about the mule pack trail where you had to go up like this. And then we were to the west of Chowan, which is almost centered, almost to the center of Korea.
Yeah, I think Shorewon is still in South Korea at this point.
Yeah. And then north of those is what they called, at that time they called it the Iron Triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Pyongyang. The three of them made a triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And Pyongyang, we never were into Pyongyang itself. We were on the outskirts. I remember somebody commenting on, yeah, well, it looks like we're not going to go into town tonight. We're going south again. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the front line didn't shift too much in the period you were there. And, and
some,
Pyongyang was some ways to the rear of all of that.
Not that far. No. Of course, we, as a grunt, you once in a while you got to look at a map. But you didn't really know where you were going and what was going on and so forth. But there's so many little villages and little towns, anywhere from a dozen to 20, 25 hooches that were in these so-called villages. They had a name, some didn't have a name. And so you went by what somebody told you. That's how it worked.
Did you get into Seoul?
Oh, I saw a couple times. Yeah, we were having one of our problems. We couldn't get enough supplies. And I have a long, skinny foot, and I needed new boots because the boots I was wearing, the sole had come undone. There was no shoe repairs where we were. I walked down the road and I go, because the sole was flapping on my boot. So they sent me down there to see if they could get me some boots. And I spent 2 or 3 hours, piles and piles and piles of boots. Nowhere near, like lots of size 9s, but no 12 narrows. So that came in handy though. Later on, we started out in the wintertime with shoe packs, which was a rubber bottom with a leather high top kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. You had 2 pairs of maybe 1/2 inch thick felt inner soles and 2 pairs of very thick, maybe hand knitted ski socks. And what you did is you put the inner soles in the shoe packs and put on 1 pair of socks. The other ones you put inside, next to your body, put inside your jacket, so that they would dry from the body heat. And every day you were supposed to change them. Well, there was no question, because after about 2 or 3 hours, if you were not moving around, you got cold, your feet. The idea of taking your boots and socks off and have ice in between your toes and ice crystals in the socks and on the inner soles, you knew it was cold. Yeah. But that was what the thing, you shook the ice out and put that pair of socks and the inner soles inside your shirt and put the so-called dry ones, warm ones, into the boots, and went on like that every day. But they came out at least, a couple of small shipments of Mickey Mouse boots, thermal insulated boots. And they were all big ones. And so I got a pair of boots out of that. Man, they were great. You could go 8 or 9 hours and your feet were warm. You did not, and all you wore was a pair of GI socks. They were good. They were the greatest thing. And then, but some of the guys got them, some of the guys didn't. It was the same way. You could go to some of these places in the rear, and everybody seemed to have them. And here they are, they're 25, 30 miles from the shooting. They also had, we had sort of a PX ration is what we called it. Initially, we were given toothpaste and cigarettes and stuff. We were giving them for nothing. But then they changed it so we had to buy them. Carton of cigarettes, $1. Toothpaste, two tubes for maybe 50 cents. But you would get a truckload of stuff in for roughly 250 people. And there was no way was there 250 candy bars, let alone anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. If a camera came in, they used to raffle it off because maybe more than one guy wanted a camera. I bought a Rolex for $100. I won the draw at that time. 2 or 3 months down the road, somebody offered me 150, 125. I sold it.
Okay. Now, were there problems with sort of black market or corruption?
Not where we were.
Okay.
They had problems in the rear because I remember we were getting 50-gallon drums, supposedly antifreeze, half water.
Mm-hmm.
We had the same way with fuel oil, half water. So back somewhere, they were dumping the oil out and the antifreeze and filling them with water so they would feel pretty much the same weight.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of that PX ration thing. You were supposed to be authorized 1 case of Coke, 1 bottle of whiskey, 1 case of beer, 1 bottle of whiskey a month. I never saw my bottle of whiskey. I was, you had to put your name in and they would be drawn because we'd get maybe 6 bottles, 250 guys. You'd get a case of beer or a case of Coke, same way. So many would come in and you had a drawing. And, but I remember going into an EM club, NCO club in the rear, and they had booze stacked up on the bars,
All right.
Quite a different world.
Now you were talking about the boots and socks and so forth. You were talking about being through a very cold winter.
Oh, yeah.
What was winter in Korea like?
Actually, 30 below was not uncommon. I sent back to my mother for her to get me a commercial thermometer. And she sent it was about a foot high. It was pretty heavy duty. And I used to hang it up wherever we were, hang it on one of the logs. And wake up in the morning and it was maybe 20 below, 10 below, 30 below. And it got cold, so cold one time because 30 was the max. I mean, when it was the lowest it would go, it was broken. Whether somebody broke it, I don't know. Whether the cold broke it, I don't know. But I didn't bother having her send another one.
Now, when it got that cold, did that affect the vehicles or your equipment or anything like that?
Well, now here is something. They were basic vehicles. Most of them were left over from WW2, had gone through a refurb, I guess you could call it. And there was everything from like welded areas where bullet holes had been through the fenders, and so they were all reactivated through a rebuild setup they had in Japan. Mm-hmm. And this was everything from 2.5 tons to 5 tons, 3/4 tons in Jeeps. Some of them went sideways going down the road. The frames were bent or whatever. But when you needed them, one of the big things that was bad is some of them had 6-volt electrical systems, some of them had 12-volt electrical systems, some had 24, the newer ones had 24-volt systems. I learned a trick when I was working in construction in Northern Ontario. You shut your vehicle, including your own car. We had hand chokes in those days. When you shut your car down, or a commercial vehicle, shut it off with a choke, let it strangle itself out. And it worked. 30 below, up there. Korea. We couldn't get our cars or trucks started. And I said, let me try something. So I took some joker's truck. I strangled it, shut it off with a choke. Started every morning. Started towing, get that one going, then we'd get a 2.5 going. And then we'd start branching out to get the others. Everybody in my outfit, they followed my instructions about shut it off with a choke. It worked. That was something I learned in Northern Ontario.
Right. What kind of impression did you have of the Korean people themselves?
I did not, in Korea, I did not have that much contact with Korean people. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they have 3 languages. They have a language that you speak to your equal. They have one that you speak sort of kowtowing to somebody that's above you. And then you have one that you speak to the one down below you. You get that grr in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that you get used to. And while I was with the Koreans, I did pick up some Korean. And, you know, I could get by, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I ate a lot of Korean food. I do. I still today like kimchi. I think kimchi is one of the best things there is. Of course, I can't eat it. I'm a tube feeder now.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, you did have some Koreans that you did who worked on the bases.
we had. Well, when I was with the Koreans, there was one thing. It was more a military thing, and we almost overrun one time, and I was standing alongside of the Korean troops, shooting my machine gun, my 45 grease gun. Whether I hit anybody, I have no idea. But I know that some of those guys died. The Koreans, first thing they do is they go for the Chinese boots. They were like, what would you call them, insulated tennis shoes.
Mm-hmm.
They were real thick. Because they had chintzy shoes. But the Koreans would go after the Chinese boots. And it was funny, boy, it took 5 minutes. Zap, they were all gone.
Right. Now you've got a picture in your collection of somebody who I guess was a North Korean deserter.
That's the way we got it. He was a deserter. We couldn't send him back. We had no way of holding him, handcuff him. We had a battery commander who took over.
Mm-hmm.
Who the other guy was, I can't remember. His name always came there. Captain Matney. He had been a master sergeant before WW2. About halfway through WW2, he was given a commission. And so he was a captain in Korea, and he was our battery commander. He was an old-time soldier. He knew how the world was. He even worked out a way where he could send a truckload of troops to Seoul on a Sunday or a Saturday. And anybody misses that truck, anybody screws up, the truck stops. Nobody missed it.
Mm-hmm. But did he have to deal with this North Korean, or?
Yeah, he was a commander. He worked something out, and we had him for a couple of weeks. That's all I can remember. Mm-hmm. They sent in CIC, I don't know, to interrogate him. The South Koreans wanted to take him,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but the Americans, the CIC, whatever, they didn't want to give him to him. So we had him, like I say, so by the end of a couple of weeks, he was gone. The Americans took him somewhere.
Okay. And you also adopted basically a Korean houseboy, or your unit did?
Well, we adopted Chim Yong-gun, that was his name. I'll never forget it.
And how did you wind up with him?
We found him along the side of the road one day. We were moving. Somebody saw something. We stopped for a piss break or something, and somebody spotted him in the ditch. And he was not doing too good. He was semi-conscious. And so our medics, we had 2 medics with us, and the medics worked on him. And down the road, they took him to a doctor, and they didn't want to keep him because they would have to get him back to the rear or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, we had him for a couple, 3 months. We had him quite a while. I often wondered what happened to him, and how would I have ever located him?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
All right. Are there other things that kind of stand out in your memory about the time you spent in Korea?
The cold is one of the things that stands out the most. But then sometimes we were troubled by infiltrators, and then again, nothing for months.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, whether the infiltrators were friendlies or not, the South Korean troops, whenever they were near us, they used to infiltrate stealing food. They wanted food.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we ever caught them, but we found some sort of proof.
Mm-hmm.
We had a warrant officer who had just been, he was an old non-com that had been given the warrant. And he was an infantry type. And several times he took a patrol out to try to get some of these jokers. And I figured if anybody was going to get him, he was. He was pretty sharp. And that stands out.
Okay.
Early one morning, we got about an inch or two of snow. How about a Siberian tiger prints in the snow?
Oh.
We had what we call our motor pool area, you know, where they worked on the trucks and vehicles and so forth. And we were walking, you know, towards the mess hall maybe, and we had to go through that area. And one of the guys says, "Hey, so-and-so says there's some tiger prints out here." What? So anyhow, we looked, and sure enough, some guys that big. And you could see the pads, where the pads either come through, walk right on through. It doesn't look like it even stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And yet here we got all these howitzers here and vehicles and people living there. Went right on through.
Okay. Now you also got an R&R in Japan, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay. What was that like?
that was good. It was one of the greatest things. The big thing is getting a chance to be with other people. You didn't have to go to the R&R Center. Stayed in a Japanese hotel. Great. You know, and then particularly when they give you a bath. The water is boiling hot, and these maids, they get you in that water as hot as it can go. They push your head down, and they soak you in that super thing, your boiled meat. And then they take you out, and they sit you on a stool about that high. And they scrub you from the top of your head to the tip of your toes, even with little pumice stones. And then they rinse you off buckets of cold, icy water. And then back into that hot water and soak for half an hour. And you would be surprised. You thought you were clean when you went in, because we all had showers when we left the R&R Center. You could go like this, and there was the dirt coming out of your pores. That was, but the idea of being able to go into, now there were certain areas the Japanese people did not want American GIs.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd see a sign that says off limits, but it was put up by the Japanese people rather than the American MPs or whatever. But there were nice places to go, lots of, I shouldn't say lots of sightseeing. I had to go and look at some of these old castles and things like this. If I would have had the chance, I would have liked to have gone into archaeology.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in grade school, I was the only grade school student that had a library card that would let me go downstairs to all the archaeological books. And I read many, many, many of them.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, I enjoyed it. Then I got a chance to go to Hiroshima. And now this is 52 to, 45. So we're talking about 7 years since the bomb had dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And it was still piles and piles and piles of rubble with the roads going through. And that was interesting. And your feelings, you know, here's a place where 40,000 died with one blast. And they were still rebuilding it. And this is also where a lot of people were dying from radiation poisoning that more or less caught up with them.
Right.
I saw a couple of people that were pretty well burned, skin burns. But we were only there an hour or two. I took the tour. They had the special forces, special services, had tour buses. I was curious about that.
And how did the Japanese people treat the American servicemen?
Very nice. I was surprised. I talked to a guy who had been a major, and I was just a young PFC or whatever. And he was asking me, what do you think about Korea, what's going on and all that? He said something to the effect, he says, we told them, let us get back in there, we'll take care of them. And I believed him. Yeah, I believe that would have happened.
Not sure the Koreans would have liked it much, but
But he would, yeah, they didn't want him, no.
all right. So now, okay, you've sort of, you accumulated enough points that you were able to leave, and you think you left a little bit before the actual armistice was signed, and you went
About
to
the same
Japan.
time,
Yeah,
in that
okay.
neighborhood.
Yeah, and then you ship back to the States. Okay. How much time did you have left on your enlistment at that point? You still have a year?
Probably about a year and a half.
Okay. And what did they do with you after you got back?
I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, which was one of the worst outfits I've ever been in. They were still fighting World War II when we go out to the field for field problems. They were still worried about Nemagen and Market Garden and some of these failures that they had. Some of the poorest troops, that's what I call them. Saturday payday, boy, oh boy, you see, talk about the mess that would come back to the barracks. And, but I was not happy. But then I found out that there was an observation battalion that somewhere along the line, bouncing around with those different jobs, I had picked up an MOS that I didn't know I had. That's military occupation specialty.
Mm-hmm.
And they were hurting for people with that MOS. So I got a transfer into that outfit. First thing I did when I got there, was that, after getting my feet on the ground and so forth, basic training. Training recruits.
Mm-hmm.
They had a bunch of kids, most of them were like New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York area. And so we ran, maybe 250 recruits through basic training. And everything was the same, essentially the same thing I'd gone through.
Mm-hmm.
Learn how to march without falling on your feet, and your rifle, and clean the barracks. And I had fun. I enjoyed that because you could see the difference between a skinny kid who at the end of the 4 months, he'd gained 20 pounds and looked pretty good. Then you seen the fat kid who had lost 20 pounds and looked pretty good. And who, most of them were enjoying themselves. Of course, we always had a couple of dummies that would screw it up. But it was enjoyable.
Okay. Now, is this before you got assigned to the observation unit, or was this
Oh, no,
after?
we were in the observation unit.
Okay.
The observation unit was the 449th Field Artillery Observation Battalion,
Mm-hmm.
which was part of North Carolina National Guard, but it was still on active duty from WW2.
Okay.
And when they closed, when they deactivated the 449th, they activated it as the 268th Forward Field Artillery Observation Battalion. Now the 268th was the battalion that had 40 people murdered. They lined them up machine gun. 268th, I think it was B Battery in Germany, where they got the massacre.
Is that the Malmedy Massacre, Battle of the Bulge?
No,
Yeah.
not Malmedy, but not too far in that neighborhood. It was a massacre. That was activated as a 268. The duties there, the whole post at Fort Bragg needed resurveyed. The survey had been done by the WPA in 32, 33, or whatever, 35. And all kinds of impact area where they could fire artillery and missiles and so forth. So we had to survey the whole post, both for artillery survey, which would be to identify the targets, and also for civilian type surveying to identify the benchmarks that were put in back in the 30s, put new benchmarks in. And we were in the field at least 3 days out of a week, and sometimes all week. Sometimes we'd take our pup tents and live out there. But it was interesting work, very good. And after a couple of years, we were teaching classes, and to the National Guard, not the 449th, they were included, but other field artillery outfits that had come on active duty for the 2 weeks training. And we would conduct classes to teach them, you know, how everything. This was the time when the Army was going from yards and feet and inches, going to metric system. We were evaluating different kinds of surveying instruments too. We used to have an old, shoot, what did they call those old things? It was like a telescope. But anyhow, we were using theodolites. Anyway, we had one boy that was called up. That was not too wild. But we had this one that was Havistock, made in Scotland. About that big, and it had eyepieces sticking out. It made me think of an artillery or a battleship with tubes, cannon. But the Wild T2 is what we adopted and recommended. And we did that, and we worked with that. We several assignments while we were there. They picked the whole unit up, and we had to go to Fort Rucker, Alabama. They were in the process of activating Fort Rucker to be aviation center. This was in like 55, 54, 55. We also went on a maneuver in where they used to take the whole state of Louisiana, a little bit of Texas, and conduct operations, field problems with people from Fort Bragg. We had like the 82nd, we had the 101st. We had one of the armored divisions from
Fort
Texas,
Hood?
Fort Hood, yeah. And anyhow, they were all over, say, from halfway up Arkansas, all the way down to the swamps. Anyhow, we were not in the maneuver itself. We were resurveying old benchmarks. We had ephemeris, we had different publications that listed the coordinates, and we would have to trace them by coordinates and using the instruments, find them, and if they were still there, see what kind of shape they were in, and if they were not there or they had been destroyed, knocked over, then we wipe them out. I also had a fun thing there too. Very, very funny. I told Vicki about that. Anyhow, we're looking for one benchmark, and there's a railroad track, and there's about a 10-foot high barbed wire fence, little squares, I remember it like that. So we're more or less advanced party, we're out scouting around, because sometimes I could walk right to the benchmarks without having to use the instruments. So I got my Jeep, got a couple of guys in the Jeep, so I got my map and whatever, and I'm walking along, and I look over the other side of the railroad tracks. Here's a big steer with long horns like so, brown and white. And he, I think he thought he was a bull, but I don't know. So anyhow, you stay over there and I'll stay over here. So I went on a little further down, sure enough, I found the benchmark. And so I was turned around. In the meantime, somebody had followed me. And he was behind me, but he was probably 20 feet or whatever. And he was walking. And I thought, well, he started doing one of these numbers with his head and his big rack. I says, this does not look good. And my troops are back there, 100 yards, laughing their rear ends off. And I thought, they're not going to be very much help. So what do I do? So here, I'm a city boy. And I had seen cattle and beef and whatever. So he puts his head down and he's getting ready, and there's a pole. And how am I going to climb a doggone electric pole? And there's nothing to climb with. I can't climb that barbed wire fence. I'd leave half of me with it. And well, go on to them railroad tracks. That's not too good either. So he's coming around this way. I'm going this way. So we're going back and forth, like in the cartoons. Back and forth, back and forth. And I thought to myself, my troops are having a ball. And I said, well, this could go on all day, and I'm not going to do it. So for some reason, why I did it, I have no idea. I jumped out and went like this, wah! He turned around and took off. So anyhow, I went back to the Jeep, and naturally, I had words of wisdom to tell the guys. But as I was walking back to the Jeep, there was the steer standing next to a bush or a low tree or something, watching me every bit of the way. He never made a step towards me. So, meantime, I was looking for another pole to get behind. That is something that really, I got a kick out of it. It was funny, but it wasn't. It could have been bad.
Now, at what point along the way do you decide to stay in the Army?
About that time, I guess. I had been doing work that I liked, and the Army sent me to a couple of military survey type courses, for particularly oriented, towards the field artillery.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school at Fort Sill. Now, I had bought, since I had not finished high school, I went and took GED test at the education center. And I talked him into let me take them all at once. And so that worked. And so I'm now a high school graduate.
Okay.
And let's see. I was debating whether or not to get in. I still had, 3 or 4 months to go. I was planning on getting married. And so I took a couple of weeks leave. I went home to Pennsylvania to look around, talk to some buddies of mine. 2 of my buddies had gone to college and they never went near the military.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was working as a diesel mechanic helper, and the other was a personnel clerk in one of the factories. And everybody else, they were lucky to have a job. And I said, well, boy, this is not so good to get out and get married and have to get a job. So I even contacted that outfit that I'd worked with in Canada 5 or 6 years before, whatever it was. And their management had changed. And but one of the owner's sons was now running the place. He and I had run it together, shoveling gravel and whatever. We'd worked together. And they more or less modernized and all that. So that didn't seem to be too good. So I figured, well, I'm young. Another 3 years not going to hurt me. So I did not make my mind up. I'd take 3 at a time. Well, other guy says, hey, take 6 and get a bonus, like 3 months pay or something as a re-enlistment bonus. And I said, oh, geez, no, 6 years. If I don't like it, out I go. Anyhow, at this time, the military, the Army, was starting the warrant officer helicopter pilot program. And I looked into that. I could have gotten a direct warrant in field artillery observation techniques, which was radar and electronics and all kinds of stuff. It's not the same anymore, but anyhow, I looked at this helicopter thing, and a friend of mine, outfit down the road, he applied for it and he got it. Later on, he ended up working for me. But I thought to myself, well, maybe I could learn to fly, but couldn't take the harassment because you were harassed when you were a candidate, a warrant officer candidate at that time. Or maybe I could take the harassment and not learn to fly, but in either case, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured, well, that's the end of it. Now let's see, I took the 3 years, and I did not get any 6-month bonus or whatever it was.
Okay. Now, what rank were you at that point?
I was a very master sergeant.
Okay.
I was coming up for it, or I'd made it, one of the two. And I told my fiance at the time that I was thinking about staying in the Army. And she says, well, whatever you do, you're it. I said, well, this is what my plans are. If things don't work out, I finish the hitch, out I go. 3 years. So anyhow, got married and settled, and I thought I was talked to by several officers, higher ranking, like majors at that time, lieutenant colonels. He said, why don't you go to OCS? because artillery was short junior officers. Even though they had ROTC, they could not fill up all the places. So anyhow, I said, sure, I'll go to OCS. And I told the wife at that time that, well, I graduate from OCS. I'll make a career out of it, and I'll do 20 years. And she says, okay, 20 years? She'll go with 20 years. So I went to OCS. I was assigned there at Fort Sill as a TAC officer, evaluate the officer candidates, several other side jobs, a platform instructor. Oh, boy, I haven't got there yet, but anyhow. Teach classes. I love being a military instructor.
But you had to go through the officer candidate school yourself first.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did that actually consist of?
In my case, it was very easy because I had that background. When I had gone through in Korea, I learned a little bit of everything that went on in an artillery unit.
Right.
And all the years of when I'd gone through this forward field artillery observation battalion, I knew all this stuff. And I was teaching classes to the senior candidate classes for them to pass. And
Right.
here I'm just got there.
Right. Okay.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
And so then how long is the actual school?
6 months.
Okay.
22 weeks, 6 months, I think.
Okay.
We started with what reported in for my class, plus a few we picked up that had been set back for maybe health reasons or something. We had 71 71 candidates. We graduated 21. And I was about in the middle somewhere.
Okay. So what happened to the rest of them?
Academics.
Okay.
Field artillery is a lot of math. And I taught myself. I bought two books in a bookstore, trigonometry and geometry, because I didn't get far enough in high school. So I taught it myself. I got my own shortcuts. I still use it. Well, I haven't done it.
Were you using slide rules and things at that point?
In those days, yes, we had the slide rules, and the little coordinate squares. Yeah, we had that. That's what we did. That's what it was all about in Korea, was those little things. Right after I got out of OCS, they changed to a new thing called the Rizzo fan, which was like a straight rod with an angle on it, with the degrees. Everything was in mils or degrees. I can't recall everything now because it's a couple days ago. It was the Rizzo fan, and that is gone now. It's all electronic.
Right.
But anyhow, I had no trouble transitioning to the Rizzo fan because I had that background. So as I said, they kept me busy. So anyhow, I graduated, and they assigned me right back to OCS as a TAC officer.
Right.
So while I was there, we had 3 TAC officers that were considered primary instructors. And I was one of them. And we taught classes within the OCS area, particularly OCS type subjects. I can't recall. Most of them had to do with like military discipline and very military things. And I enjoyed being a platform instructor. I could teach the classes. It bothered me not. Of course, I'm an Irishman. I didn't even have to teach to kiss the Blarney Stone when I was there. I got born with the gift of gab. So anyhow, we did this, and then I got assigned to one of the batteries where I had something like 30, 35 candidates to evaluate, and that would be elements of upper class and middle class and junior class, depending on how far along they had been. So I had to evaluate them. I had to take, we also would go on field problems with them, and they would do everything from moving a whole battery out into the field, laying and positioning the guns, parking the trucks, the vehicles, what have you. And just as if and the artillery OCS was based on being a battery commander. Infantry OCS and the others was being a platoon leader. So it's a tougher school. It was
Yeah.
a tougher school. So I enjoyed everything I had to do with it.
So when were you there? What period of time
That
were you
would be
doing it?
1957 through, I started flight school in October of 58, so a little over a year.
Okay. So
Now,
how'd you
I,
wind up in flight school?
Well, this is, while I was there, some of the guys I was working with, they got the poop sheet. Army's looking for observation pilots, artillery spotters. I never thought of being an artillery spotter. I'm 26 years old. And 9 of us applied. 2 of us got it. Both of us made it too, by the way. And so I went to Camp, what was it called? Gary Air Force Base, outside of San Marcos, Texas. The instructors were mostly WW2 pilots, Air Force pilots. Charlie Noble, he taught me to fly. He would kick the back of my seat every now and then. What are you going to do now, dummy? That kind of thing. But he taught me to fly. About 2/3 of the way through the primary phase, we had students that would wash out. And Jimmy Carroll, who was another instructor, he had lost 2 students. One was just afraid of flying, and the other washed out for it crashed. He got a prop landing. So anyhow, they put everybody's name in the hat. I got picked to go to Jimmy Carroll. And I say this, Charlie Noble taught me to fly. Jimmy Carroll made me the smoothest pilot you ever want to see. I have had so many compliments. And I say that Jimmy Carroll put the polish on. And that was whether I was flying a fixed wing or a helicopter. I finished primary, went to Rucker. Remember, I'd been to Rucker a couple of years before.
Explain a little bit for an outside audience. Are you talking about primary flight training?
That's your first 4 months.
Okay, and then
Actually, it was 3 months. You start from scratch.
Okay.
And you go with your instructor, you meet him. You go half-day flying and half-day classroom.
And what kind of aircraft did you have?
We had, at that time, they were called an L-19, which are now called a TL. Oh, no. They're now called an O-1. They're all out of the Army now.
Right.
Most of them came in Korea and afterwards. It was a 2-place, one behind the other. Instructor in the back, you up front.
Were these single engine, twin
Single
engine?
engine,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
213 horsepower.
Did you fly in any other kind of aircraft before that, or did you start with the O-1? Yeah.
That was my first
Okay.
time behind the controls. Well, a lot of guys were lucky. They had some stick time. I didn't. And I had a ride one time in one of those. And I didn't know from nothing. I'm too busy looking around. And anyhow, I went through primary.
Okay.
And I went to Fort Rucker for what they called advanced. And this was where you learn how to take off and land in short strip, 400 feet, 300 feet. You're literally coming down like this and break the fall when you get to the end. Come in over a barrier. You land on curved roads. You fly what we call nap of the earth, in and out of the treetops. And this is with a fixed-wing airplane. And anyhow, that was another, let's see, we graduated April. So that was another 3 months.
Okay.
We were lucky because we finished our primary, and then we had the break, a Christmas break, and then we started up right after New Year's, and it was 8 April. So anyhow, we went into April, and we got our wings. And I was picked as part of a training class. The Army had decided that everybody, all the Army aviators, were to be instrument rated. And so they took a bunch of us and sent us to instrument school. And so we learned how to fly instruments, and that was about another 2 months.
Okay. I can explain what flying instruments means.
With no reference to the outside. You're flying in a bunch of pea soup clouds, and you can see nothing except inside the cockpit. And you have your navigation instruments, and you have your engine instruments. different locations depending on the type of airplane. And anyhow, you're taught how to make an instrument takeoff, where you're under the hood. You have a baffle, whatever, the hood, so you can't see outside even when it's nice weather. And all you've got to look at is those navigation and engine instruments. And so you take off, and the idea is to stay straight down the middle of that runway, and away you go. So, but then you do the flying, you get to where you're going, you get to your destination, and between where you took off and where you landed, you may have some holding patterns to fly, but all this time you cannot see outside. And you get to where you're going, and you have an approach plate, which tells you to be at a certain fix at a certain time, to fly out and make can't remember the turn now, make the turn and come back, go down to a certain altitude, and you land. All this under the hood.
Mm-hmm.
So you did that for about 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks, I can't recall. And so here I was, an instrument-rated aviator, and I wasn't even signed off in any airplanes yet.
Mm-hmm.
So then they signed us off in the Bird Dog, the 01. And I got assigned to Fort Sill, Arizona, which was a great assignment. They were flying electronic projects. Many of it hush-hush. Some of it probably still hush-hush. And we would fly, we would have equipment mounted on these airplanes. Most of them were Beavers, you know, a U.S or L-20 at that time. And fly it at night, and in this particular case, you were emitting radar pulses. And the idea was you could set off a whole minefield full of mines without getting near. And, you know, you got your friendly troops are going to cross that area, so you could fly over that and blow up all the mines, and that'd be pretty relatively safe. And you had some that up in the air, artillery or mortars coming, and we'd get to that point, and it would all explode in the air. This is some of the stuff that we flew at night. It was interesting, very fascinating. Of course, it never worked, but some of it did. Some of the stuff, and they've even adapted like airborne SLAR, side-looking airborne radar. It was on the side of an airplane. They had them, you know, later on. They used them in Vietnam and so forth. Air Force, Army, Navy, they all used them. Also, we had, heavens to Murgatroyd. You got, anyhow, we flew different things, but we also had some projects. We had stuff scattered out through Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and even parts southern Utah, Southern California. We had electronic stuff. Some of it was just take weather readings, but some of it was stuff you knew anything about. You landed on the road, went and opened the cupboard, you peeled off 2 or 3 feet of paper, took it back in, made a note as to where you got it, and went on, flew your route. We used to fly, we had one of the Bird Dogs. Well, we had 2 or 3 of them. They originally were considered primary instrument trainers, but 3 airplanes is not enough to train. So we took the second instrument panel out, and we used it for sort of fast transportation. Fast, 120 knots. Anyhow, we used to fly one of those and go to these different places out in the middle of nowhere and do the data. I flew a couple of runs with like a full colonel, and we had to go up into Nevada, and where they had people on sites, various sites, doing different electronic things. So I would pick out a road, and I'd contact the outfit on the ground and tell them where to go to meet us, and I would land on the road, or even on the dirt road, depending on what the situation was. And this colonel would get out and go spend a couple hours with them, and he'd say he figured on leaving at a certain time. Well, okay, I gotta go get some fuel. Knew where I could get some fuel, because we'd made several other stops. So I went to this one place, and I said, geez, I better get something to eat. And there's this big, it looked like a combination of trailers all hooked together. So I went in, and they had beer signs, you know, Coors and whoever, hamburger, the menu, and it was a whorehouse. I didn't know that. I went in there and I ordered my burger because I was going to gas up and take off because I had to get back out to where that colonel was. And these jokers are sitting at the bar, and every now and then some gal walks by and they go up the hallway, you know. And I thought to myself, what in the world is going on here? And then it finally just came through. And hey, well, I had my burger and I had to go out, and the airfield was right across the road, and that's where the gas pumps were. You know, the joker, I had to wait for the guy to come from out of town to turn the pumps on so he could gas me up. And I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, that's so and so. I don't know. And it was the only place I ran into like that. But otherwise, I had to land in some pretty rough places. But those airplanes were rugged.
Mm-hmm.
They were good. And like I said, Charlie Noble taught me to fly. And one of the things he concentrated on was emergency procedures. You know, and like Jimmy Carroll, he put the polish on. And the couple of times that I did need a problem, you know, like an engine blowing or something, I just followed with those because their voices came right back. Came right back into the back of my head.
All right. So
I even blew an engine on an airplane and landed at night on a ranch road in Texas, 15 miles north of Abilene. And
so what did you do once you land?
oh, I'd walk down to the house. Hello, the house, because they had,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what do you call it, chain link fence.
Yeah.
And called a couple of times because I didn't know if there were dogs in there or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Door open, guy says, hey, you the pilot of that airplane? I said, yeah, it's on the road. He said, yeah, we just had a call from the state police. The other guy made contact with an Air Force airplane, you know, the guy that was with me. He contacted them, who called him on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and doggone.
Watch out. All right. Now, during this period when you're doing your flight training and doing these different things, does your wife follow you from one
Oh, yeah,
base
she
to
did.
another?
We went to Fort Rucker, and we went, you know, we had a house in San Marcos, Texas, and while we were there, we were paid per diem, which I think was $5 or $6 a day. And that more or less covered the rent and utilities for the house that I rented. And the same thing, we had no quarters at Fort Rucker, so we were given per diem. Plus we were getting the flight pay on top of that. I told myself when I went to flight school, I said, well, if I can last a couple of months, I can pay off the bill for my uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought a TV set, and I could pay off my TV set. So all I gotta do is last a couple of months, and I can do it. Well, I made it, so.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on flight pay for the rest of my career.
All right. So during what time frame were you at Fort Huachuca?
That was, I can remember when I left.
Okay, when did you leave?
I left, it was October of 61, I believe.
Okay.
And I went there in probably June or July. I think it was July of 59.
Okay, so you have a couple of years there.
2.5 years.
Yeah,
About 2.5.
all right. So what's your next assignment then after you finish there?
The wall went up in Berlin. I got sent to Fort Benning to join the 2nd Infantry Division
Mm-hmm.
as an aviator. In the meantime, I had gone to helicopter school.
Okay, talk about that.
Oh, those things weren't made to fly. At least that's what my attitude was. Went to Fort Walters, Texas, and they had some problems. They had Hillers, which was the manufacturer of the helicopter, H-23s. And they had 265 horsepower. Lots of power, good. Later on I realized how good they were. But I went there and I didn't want to go to helicopter school. Well, you're going to helicopter school, do what you're told. So the funny part, my in-laws were visiting me from Northern Ontario. That's where my first wife was from. And they had just got there 3 or 4 days to Fort Huachuca when I get these orders.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyhow, they went with us. They went with us to Fort Walters and decided to go back home from there. So they stayed with us for a week, but it was too busy for them. They were in their 70s at the time. So and hey, French Canadian, not too much English. And grandma, ma mère, I used to call her ma mère. She spoke pretty good English. But anyhow, we went there, and it was in a way fun. They give you an area about the size of a football field. And in the center of that football field is a rectangular white patch, maybe about 5 foot by 10 foot. The instructor gets over there and sets it on the ground in the middle of that white patch. He says, I want you to keep this over that white patch. Wow, boy, oh boy, here I am, 100 feet this way, 300 feet that way, 100 feet this way, over controlling. I didn't realize it at the time. And he kept saying, this much, move the stick this much. And I can't remember his name, but he was a pretty good instructor too, civilian. And anyhow, I was so mad at myself. Can't keep this center on playing in the whole doggone football field area. 100 yards this way and 200 yards that way. Man, oh man. Next morning, he said, well, we're going back to such and such. It had a designation, a field number, training field number, whatever. We got there. He put it down. He said, I'm getting out. So he got out. So here I am in his helicopter. He says, practice. I picked it up, stayed right over the white thing. I can make points on that square white thing. Go where I want to go, sideways, forwards, backwards. It just clicked right away. I still didn't believe in helicopters. Another thing, that as an auto rotation, they taught us full auto rotation. In other words, cut the power, come down to a complete landing. And later on, they didn't do that anymore. And I don't think whether a civilian school does it or not, but auto rotation, the main thing, if your engine quits, you got to put it down. You got no choice. And I had a couple of times in Vietnam I had to use it, but the thing was, anyhow, I finished helicopter school, went back to Fort Huachuca. They were going to send me, and there was a couple other guys went to helicopter school at the same time. They were going to send us to qualify, and we had 2 or 3 bigger helicopters. They're H-21s, and